Good evening, everybody. How are you? So if everyone could take their seats, we're going to start in a few minutes. So thank you all for joining us here tonight. This is very exciting for me, and it's very exciting for us as Native Sons to be here. And as the saying goes, if you build it, they will come. And I feel like that's perfect because we're here at Google. And I also am really grateful to Torrence Boone and Victor Scotti for helping to make this happen. They met with me, they heard my vision for Native Son, and they said, let's do something. So I'm grateful that we're here because technology is the future. Technology is how we now live, breathe, communicate. And it's super important that we tell our stories that way, that we see ourselves that way, and that we use that and that we work in this space. So, Native Son is an organization about inspiration and empowerment for Black gay men. I started it a year ago. We've done several conversations like this. We did one around Stay Woke. We've done Black gay male identity, Black gay images in the media, and we've also done the Native Son Awards, which a lot of you have attended. So I just want to real quickly before we start show you a video to show you just a little bit more of the Native Son flavor. Native Son is a platform that I created to inspire and empower Black gay men. A big impetus for this movement is so that as Black gay men we can see each other. I think it's really important that we come together, we celebrate each other, and we also talk about the issues that are relevant to our community and also think about what are the long-term goals? How do we build mentorship? How do we build networking? And how do we sustain and protect ourselves, especially in challenging times like this? So that's Native Son, and thank you. Thank you. So, a big part of what was going to happen tonight is that we're going to talk about Black gay men in technology and their narrative so that it can inspire other people and so that it can inspire all of us. So, without further ado, I want to invite our host up to moderate the panel, Mr. Torrence Boone.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you
Emil.
so much.
So, good evening, everyone. My name is Torrence Boone. I'm a VP in the Global Business Organization here at Google. And on behalf of Google, I just want to welcome you all this evening. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules. Hopefully you had a fantastic Thanksgiving holiday. I know it's a really, really crazy time, but this is, I think, a pretty historic gathering because I'm not aware of another forum where we brought together such an incredible panel to discuss such an interesting and forward-looking issue, and that is Black gay male identity and how that connects and influences technology. And at Google, diversity and inclusion is so critical for everything that we do. We also are incredibly committed to innovation and really pushing the envelope of the types of dialogue that, again, bring people together, that drive that diversity and inclusion agenda. So I want to invite our panelists up to take a seat. I will introduce them as they come up. So if we start with Marcus. You want to come on up, Marcus? So Marcus Mabry is the director of mobile and offline platforms at CNN. He oversees all mobile and off-platform efforts across emerging platforms and products and all CNN digital properties, including CNN.com, CNN CNN Politics, and CNN Money. Marcus joined CNN from Twitter, where he ran the Moments product for US and Canadian audiences. And prior to his time at Twitter, he launched the New York Times Watching section, which highlighted noteworthy stories from around the internet. He's an author of 2 books, one on Condoleezza Rice and another on Black America, and he's a graduate of Stanford. Please join me in welcoming Marcus. Next up, we have Antonious Porch, who serves as the general counsel of Shazam. I know everyone has used their product.
Thank you.
I'm a fan of the product. And prior to joining Shazam, Antonious spent over a decade at the global entertainment company Viacom. For most of his tenure, he worked at Nickelodeon, serving as its vice president and deputy general counsel. And while at Viacom, he served as the executive champion of Emerge, which was the LGBT employee resource group at the company, which was dedicated to creating a welcoming environment for all Viacom employees. And prior to Viacom, he served as the director of business and legal affairs at Classic Media, now DreamWorks Classics, and an animation studio, production and brand licensing company. He is overly educated. He graduated from Yale, Columbia Law School, and the Executive Management Program at Harvard Business School. So welcome, Antonious. Next up, we have Warren Satchel. Warren is the men's fashion editor at Amazon Fashion. So he's had a really busy weekend with Black Friday and Cyber Monday. And prior to Amazon, he worked in buying, merchandising, and product management across diverse labels and brands, including Armani Exchange, Gap Europe, Indigo Books and Music, which is a lifestyle brand in Toronto, Kenneth Cole, and Original Penguin. Warren serves as the New York Fashion Advisory Board. He serves on the New York Fashion Advisory Board for VCU, where he graduated with a degree in fashion merchandising. He also serves on the board of the Art Institute of New York. So welcome, Warren. And last but not least, we have James Felton Keith, who is an award-winning engineer and economist and chair of the International Data Trade Association. He is building a global ecosystem focused on cyber insurance technology and predictive analytics. James also co-founded Slay TV network, an ad tech firm, and he specializes in the ethnography of technology and economic inclusion. He is the former CEO of the LGBT Chamber of Commerce and a mayoral technology appointee in Detroit during the city's landmark bankruptcy process. And he serves on the boards of OSTEM, NYC Equality Coalition, and the Democratic National Committee. So join me in welcoming James. So we thought we'd actually start with a bit of an icebreaker, just so that you get to know the panel in more personal terms. And given the subject of our evening and this amazing audience of Black gay men and allies, we wanted to start by asking each of them to name a famous or important Black gay male hero and why. So I'll actually start, just to get them off the hook a little bit, give them some time to think about it. I would name Alvin Ailey. In a previous life, was a professional dancer, and the first professional dance concert that I ever went to was a performance by Alvin Ailey, and he's a favorite choreographer of mine, so that would be my choice. Who wants to go next?
I'll go next. For me, it's pretty easy. RuPaul. And that is partially because if you Google, since we are here, if you Google RuPaul and Marcus Mabry, you'll see an interview I did with RuPaul when I was at the New York Times a few years ago. And it's RuPaul. I mean, you all probably know, right? Why? Because RuPaul is brilliant, shockingly brilliant, and has lived through so much, has been on the margins and on the fringes, and has been at the center of our culture too, and has lived it all. And in kind of a display of the wisdom of RuPaul, I interviewed him at a very heady moment out in LA after the Supreme Court had actually legalized same-sex marriage rights. And, this was a moment of great triumph. And so I asked him, I said, well, what's next, do you think, for LGBTQ rights, given that we've gotten this far? And rather than being triumphalist, RuPaul said, well, there have been moments like this before of great openness, and they've been followed by moments of great closure. And so we had, the last one I remember he said was before 9/11, there was all this amazing progress happening. 9/11 happened and the country changed overnight. Things shut down. What was allowed, what America felt comfortable with, shut down. America was afraid, and things got very dark, very fast. And RuPaul said, right now this is a moment of great openness. I expect it won't last. I expect there'll be another moment of darkness. And to have that wisdom at that moment, I thought was so important. And something that, my partner and I, we have two 7-year-old boys who'll be 8 next week. And I take that wisdom from RuPaul with me every day as a journalist, as I look at the world and the possibilities and the world my children will inherit. So I'm very aware of that. It may look good today. That's not forever.
Well, yeah, and I've met Ru, and I totally see that and found him to be phenomenal and insightful. So my personal hero in this context, not perhaps famous, is George Cheeks, who's the president of Late Night at NBC. He's a lawyer by training. He used to be the general counsel at MTV Networks, which is where I worked. And he is Black, openly gay, and successful, and has really lived authentically and inspirationally. And I know that for all the people who worked with him on the business side, under him, alongside him, he was inspirational. And so, in my sense, that's sort of a tangible hero, and that's someone I would like to emulate as I kind of move forward. And I think really is what this night is about, this conversation.
Yeah, we were trying to figure out backstage like who we would pick, but I guess when I think about over time, I'm not. I wouldn't necessarily say he's a hero, but I'm a big fan of Little Richard's music, but also music in general. Shout out to Shazam. We were talking about ways to use it faster. I didn't find out, Andy, actually our Samsung TV integrates with Shazam, and we can just automatically download all the songs. But specific to Little Richard, I think my husband's right.
We'll be
over
taking
there.
product
Yeah,
advice
right.
throughout
we're gonna
the evening.
dig right in there. But I think Little Richard comes to mind because I think all of my work as an engineer, as an economist, as an ethnographer, for people who aren't familiar with the term, it's an anthropological term for the study of culture. I just always felt this sort of undervaluement, if that's a word, from my colleagues, from my peers, from the broader culture. And I think Little Richard's career embodies that. I mean, he created so much in the genre and kind of oozed so much of his culture over American society and American culture, and was just not indemnified for it. And I think that my work to date with every company I've started, whether it's been in fintech or insurtech or ad tech, and even the trade associations and the chambers of commerce, has been an effort to kind of corral the value that I see in the world from minority figures of sorts, and better distribute it to them. I'm an engineer by trade, and I just see all problems as a distribution problem. So I'm constantly trying to figure out, how do I better distribute my value to me, and help others on that journey. And so Little Richard just comes to mind in general. Yeah.
Warren?
Well, I definitely can say that Marcus and I fought in the green room over RuPaul. But I think, just to an earlier sentiment, if I think about, specifically in this context, I think for me, it probably would be Andre Leon Talley. I say that to say it's a 6'6" Black man who, by most standards, is not necessarily reflective of the fashion industry today. And I think that, one of the things that I get from him is that he is unapologetically Andre. And I think that, that's major, especially in the time and space that we're in today. and I definitely feel like, there are days where, I'm kind of the Andre Leon of Amazon, being the only black man in most respects. So yeah.
Great. So let's start with the story behind the story. I shared your bios. We know all of the challenges of diversity in the tech industry. How did you find your way there? And was it intentional, accidental? Again, what's the backstory of how you ended up where you are?
Mine is completely accidental. I was a journalist for 20 years, mostly as a foreign correspondent and a foreign editor, based in places like Johannesburg and covering war zones and stuff. From Bosnia to Angola to Congo to Zaire, and I was at Newsweek for a long time. Then I came to the New York Times, and it was really tech was taking over the space of journalism, the journalism space. It was tech was always very important to us. It's been the backbone of what we did. 50 years ago, when they used to have foreign correspondents who were everywhere around the world, but they couldn't pick up a phone anywhere and call anybody. They had telegraphs that would, they telegraphed their stories back to New York, and somebody in New York would put that in something that could actually be printed and send it out. So tech has always been integral to what we do. But tech, in my time in journalism, has taken over the whole space. And so tech is not just integral to what we do; it's everything that we do. So us reporting and not getting the tech to get it out to distribute our stories means we didn't report anything. It meant nothing ever happened. And it's more important now than ever before. For me, it was completely incidental. It was out of desperation. Like I wanted us to survive. As businesses, I wanted us to survive. And I realized that if we did not get the tech right, then we didn't survive. And I realized that the cost of our not surviving as free press, as journalists, is the end of democracy. And so for me, it was that desperation of how do I help us to survive? Because I love making the journalism. There's nothing more fun than interviewing people and being out there and telling the world to the world. That's amazing. It's such a rush to do it. But again, I don't care how fun it is if you don't have somebody back figuring out what's the UX, how does the tech work, how do we distribute this content to people who want it and who are even willing to pay for it, journalism dies. And so it was really that kind of frustration that led me to do tech at the Times first, to do our mobile stuff, our digital mobile stuff. And then it was frustration that the Times not moving it fast enough, although the Times knew where we had to go, that led me to Google. Led me to Twitter, because Twitter had a brand new news product.
You can come to Google.
So Twitter here in New York is just across the street. And it was, I wanted to go to a place where, the thing about journalism is you have these brilliant people who are really good at getting information from people, and they rise to the top of the organization because they're really good journalists, and they become, in charge of the journalism, in charge of the whole enterprise. Well, you know what? Those abilities are not necessarily the good ones to run anything, especially a tech thing, which is what we all are increasingly. I went to Twitter because I wanted to go somewhere, and this is amazing for journalists to say, where journalists were not in charge. I want to go somewhere where the engineers were in charge. People who understood product were in charge, not people who knew how to get a story. Because who cares how to get a story? You need how to get a story out. And so that's why I went to Twitter and came back to CNN as a news place with my tech chops. Because again, I see my job as a product job.
Yep. Great.
So I didn't realize this was a job interview, and we're all getting offers out of this. But okay, so I'll revise my talking points. So I think, not unlike you, I arrived at tech mostly through disruption. So when I was a young associate at a law firm, really we were just beginning to think about how we would service this growing Silicon Alley client base, right? So it was here in New York, startups. How do we help them form? How do we help them with rounds of financing? And so it afforded me an opportunity to really learn a lot about software licensing, learn about sort of client interface very early on. So because this was a emerging space and the rules were unwritten, there was more of an opportunity to have a bigger impact very quickly. And I think for people of color, that's great, because the rules aren't written, so you can potentially have a seat at the table to write them. So that was sort of early on. But then, I arrived at Nickelodeon, and when I showed up, digital was sort of the sleepy marketing afterthought. And it was right as digital began to eat television, or at least disrupt it, where it became so important and pivotal. And you saw the shift in the audience from television to digital. And then, sort of the bigwigs were like, okay, how do we capture this? How do we get the next generation. So I happened to arrive at a point where we really started to scale up our digital business. We acquired some websites, out in LA and in San Francisco, and I worked on those acquisitions and those integrations. Then there was, moving into apps. So for us, it was gaming apps and working with engineers around those apps. And then because I was in the kid space, lots of issues around privacy, which I think we'll be talking about later. And I have to say, there was this intersection of regulation at the FCC and FTC around advertising to kids on television, and how the digital space was really an extension of television. And so the limits that were there for TV, sort of limiting the number of commercials a kid could see in an hour, needed to really transmit to websites, which were sort of these immersive, almost never-ending experiences. So to be perfectly honest, I had a seat at the table in Washington at the FCC, writing the rules that still govern the intersection of television and digital for kids today. And I think, again, when I sort of think about what was the key to this, this opportunity, it was owning something that no one else owned, being willing to roll up my sleeves and own something that no one else owned, and the level playing field to write the rules. So.
Okay. All right, we'll keep with the same workflow. Well, let's see. So
So you re-engineer it.
Yeah, I know.
True engineer.
Did I use the word workflow? Is that bad? Yeah. So, well, yeah, I guess, right. So I was an engineer first. My father was a mechanical engineer, and he got my babysitter her first job. We were all about 12, 15 years apart. Our next door neighbor was my babysitter. She was also a mechanical engineer. He got her first job. And then she got me my first job before I went to college, working for Dave Bing, who was like one of the 50 greatest basketball players. He was also the mayor of Detroit. This really old, like, killer from the middle of the 20th century. And anyway, when he came back from the NBA, because they didn't make a whole bunch of money, they started manufacturing companies. I'm originally from Detroit. And so I started my career working on automotive plant floors, and I just thought it was really logical to be an engineer, and I thought it was easy. And so then I went to engineering school at Tuskegee, and it was really hard. It took me forever to graduate, and I was kind of just a frat boy hanging out, like, please. I couldn't believe when I was graduating. Like, it just happened for me. But what also happened around that time is the internet, was happening. Web 2.0 was happening. I got my first, engineers always work a bunch of co-ops leading up to when they graduate, or you're not a real engineer. You don't have enough experience to start in the regular world. And so I got this job designing seats and airbags for Chrysler, and we worked on the Chrysler 300, and that vehicle was a standout, and it was like 2004, 2005. And my career is kind of the opposite. Then I started to meet all the business guys who were making more money. You couldn't tell me I wasn't, rich when I was making $25 an hour as a contractor. But I was working 70-hour weeks, and so I thought, that I was killing it, with a house and a company car, et cetera. And then I met all these business guys who were here in New York who worked with banks, and they were like, we're making like $250. And I was angry. And so I wanted to go to grad school. And so, I started, writing, diversity letters about, who I was, et cetera, to get into grad school and take some credits. And then the internet changed again. Facebook happened in 2005. And, my resume was on the internet. And I was really just kind of a product of the times. Everyone on my team, when I started my career as an engineer, was in their late 30s now, and they didn't want to travel with the product. So we had to build the Chrysler 300s in China. And everyone was like, no one wants to go, send the kid. Like, the kid will go. And I was dying to go. And so I was there for a year. When I got back from there, though, my perspective was different. I felt, worldly. I was more of a manager over there than an actual engineer, because I just knew the product. And so when I came back, I didn't want to start grad school, which was the plan. And I got a call from a recruiter asking me if I wanted to move to South Africa, work for a chief information officer at the state utility. And I just dropped everything. I remember I wasn't in New York at the moment, but I came to New York for the interview, and I got the interview. And I called my parents and I said, I'm dropping out of grad school. I'm done with these 9 credits. By the way, Harvard and Boston and Cambridge were the most racist, sexist, homophobic times and experiences of my life. And so I left with those 9 credits. I ended up transferring them for an MBA later. But I went to South Africa to see if I could really be, a guy in business. And my career just moved more from being a mechanical engineer to just being a process engineer. So I just started looking at business processes from that point on. And so yeah, I use words like workflow. They're in the back of my head constantly. I look at the way everyone does everything as a workflow of some sort. And
How are we doing tonight?
We're good. We're good. We're good. I mean, I track patterns. I'm always looking for patterns. Like in the crowd, I see like a sea of black, and there's one white shirt here. I can't see anyone's face, but yeah. So I think I was an engineer by trade, and I scaled into more business interactions. Today, I pretty much just argue with lawyers about who owns what.
Well, we're gonna get to that.
We'll get to that. Yeah.
Warren.
How did I arrive? I guess definitely accident, but for sure a full circle moment. How I arrived at Amazon was really just through a friend, and I think I say that to say never underestimate the power of a network. I had a really good friend, also in the industry. She worked for Saks for, quite some time. And, we were close. We knew one another. We had a great rapport. And I remember, maybe probably 2 years prior to me arriving at Amazon, she took a chance. And, she uprooted her life, her family to Seattle, essentially. And we always kept in touch. She was in New York quite often. And so, again, we had a really, really strong rapport. But I remember the day that she called me and she said, there's an opening here that I think you'd be perfect for. And so, let's hear a little bit about it. So she gave me a little bit of, some context around it. She says, let me introduce you to a few people. And I said, all right, that sounds good. Let's go with it. And I remember the last thing that she said before she hung up the phone. She said, let's get this money. And I thought,
Didn't forget that.
And I thought that was relatively weird. But now, in hindsight, definitely very appropriate. But I also said full circle moment in this sense that I remember 10 years ago getting yet another call from Amazon and, thinking like, oh, I'm kind of in the initial stages of my career, thinking like retail, brick and mortar, like, this is where it's at. This is amazing. And, and it was, but I think, had I joined 10 years ago, we could be having a very different conversation today. But, that's how I got here.
Thank you. So let's dive into the question of intersectionality and how you negotiate being Black and gay in the context of your work environments, and with some view on advice or perspective that folks in the audience can take back to their own organizations, or that they can internalize on a personal level of negotiating those two aspects of your identity.
I'm not going to go first to break the workflow.
Yeah,
We're gonna break.
we'll break the
Are you gonna be cool with that?
I'll go
So,
second.
so when I think about, being Black, I think the questions that I think I am faced with and that others might be faced with are, are you smart enough? Are you attentive to detail? Are you angry? Can you get along? Right? When I think about being gay, I think it's, are you tough enough? Can you be a leader, or are you just a follower? Are you just sort of the funny, sassy sidekick? And I think, when I think about how do you approach these things, so I know in my own experience, I'm very careful and strategic about, and as a lawyer, I have to be tough, right? I've got to be smart. But I have to be strategic about when I'm tough, when I push back, when I enlist allies to, in effect, do the dirty work for me, or to sort of kind of buttress my position. But I also think, just in terms of challenges and overcoming those things, it comes down to people want to know, can they trust you? And so how do you get to that point of trust? I think you get to that point of trust by being open and authentic. I think over time, people come to see evasiveness, and so there are questions. And I think, everyone's story is different. This is not to lay, a guilt trip on anyone, because everyone's story is different and their position is different. But I do think the quicker you get to openness, the quicker you get to authenticity, the quicker you get to trust. I think also being able to bring it back to the business, the internal business, right? So what is our goal? What's our mission? What are our KPIs? Then the external business, right? So what are the, trends in the industry, right? So show that you belong at the table and that you are part of building the business so that these other things fall into place. Then I think you also talk about your passions. People want to work with people who are real. Like, what gets you excited? Is it traveling? Is it music? Is it, movies? Whatever it is. And then I think, and I actually had this conversation with my CEO very early on. I said, I will never leave you exposed. I will always tell you the truth. I will always have your back. We may not agree, but you will always know what's coming if I see it. And we are very different people. He is a tall, blonde, Texas-born, quarterback at an Ivy League college with 4 or 5 kids in Connecticut. We could not be more different. But in that moment, we were real, we were connected, and it was the truth. And I've lived that each day through each issue, through each deal, through each, kind of business cycle. So.
Oh, sure. You wanna? Okay. So I think I would echo everything that was just said about gaining trust. I think good relationships, to drop an equation in here, are formidable. And the way I like to define formidability is sort of there's always an attraction, a trust, and a respect. And as long as those things continue to exist all together, then the relationship is formidable. You can be transparent, and it challenges some sort of forward progress. But I guess, so to add to what was just said, I was in an experience last night. So I actually had our trade association's holiday party, which was also a panel. We moved because this event was tonight. Yeah, well, I had a conflict, and they were like, well, we need you to say something at the end. So anyway, so we moved it to last night, and there was this guy in the room who accompanied this man named Shamim, who, if you all are not familiar, like created text messaging and a bunch of other, amazing engineering feats. But this older gentleman, and maybe he wasn't really a gentleman, who was taking this guy out to dinner. I guess I'm just going to be emote all over the stage right now because I'm still seething from this moment. This guy, at the end of this event, which was my event, it was this blockchain panel, and we had drinks and holiday, small bites, etc. The same kind of stuff that Google does, but not as pretty as what was outside. And at a law firm around the corner. But this older guy who was taking Shamim to dinner after, he was like, we were going around meeting the people who were in the venue at the end. And this guy met me and said, I don't really want to talk to you because there's nothing that you can say to me that I won't, no topic that you can talk about that I won't know more about. Now, they were at my event to talk about my topic. And anyway, these guys, we were talking about data and similar things and quantum mechanics. And this older white man immediately tried to, upon meeting me through the introduction of somebody else who was in the audience, started trying to measure me and quiz me about what I knew, just about random things. And because I had to, play it cool and not lose my head in the moment, I mean, I wanted to kind of spar with him and just start rambling on about things that I thought that I knew, but it would just be ridiculous. I feel ridiculous talking about it right this second. But I kind of had to, bottle it up to, seem more or as statuesque as this dude in this situation. But what I really wanted to do was just drag him down a flight of steps. Because that's who I really am. But
Say he's from Detroit.
yeah, I mean, I'm from the D, man.
I'm from Trenton. I understand.
Exactly. Hey. But so So yeah, the intersectionality piece is there. I don't know how I sign this stuff in, but I think before that we were having this conversation about queerness and with blackness because there were some Black Lives Matter people in the room. It was a pretty diverse crowd of activists and lawyers and technologists, et cetera, in the room, and sometimes you're trying to manage all these identities while still being sort of this brute force presence to say, I'm here, like, don't F with me, you in my space. And I don't know, at that moment it was just hard to manage because my usual MO is to run them over with what I think I know and have my team kind of back me up. It's like, we're here, we're a bigger gang than you, and you're on our turf. But I would be ridiculous for doing that. And it was 9 o'clock, and I was wearing a blue suit with an American flag pin. So it's difficult. Is my only answer for you, and that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's.
No, but I think to build on that, I mean, what you're getting at, and I think all of us have had these moments where there is a kind of visceral anger when you confront, overt or subtle forms of discrimination or stereotyping, or and so I think that's part of the reality of that intersectionality, like how do you manage that? And I think everyone in this room, I'm sure, has developed all sorts of strategies for doing it, but it's a burden. Warren.
Wow, how do I follow that up? I think just to kind of echo a few other sentiments that have been said already. I think I fortunately work for an organization where I can absolutely be who I am and twice on Sunday, but I do think that there's a process within that. I think we're a huge kind of trust building organization, and so I think first and foremost, it's really kind of taking your identity out of the equation, and really with acclimating to the culture, you're really trying to identify, one, how do I fit in? Who do I talk to? How do I build relationships? How do I actually build a rapport? And you realize once you find kind of what the unlock is to that, it really does open the door for everything else. I think, again, it's just building relationships, and I think that oftentimes, some of those other things don't actually even matter.
Mm-hmm.
What I love about what everyone said is the positivity of it, even in the challenges, right?
Yeah.
And we all have had them. We all been, questioned, and do you belong here, right? From the very beginning to even now, which is always blows my mind, especially given the people who ask you all the time. You're like, who the hell are you? But I think a lot of that, frankly, I think is white superiority, is the live white superiority, and that's real, I think, very much in our world, in our society today, and in our interactions and in most of our companies, if not all of our companies, because it's kind of the air we breathe in America, right? So there's that challenge. What I love about what everyone said, though, is about how it's about relationships in the end and authenticity. And so I love the fact that because of our intersectionality, all of us in this room, and even if you're an ally, I bet you also have your own intersectionalities, whether visible or not. We know how to commute across boundaries and across borders, and that's our superpower. And a lot of people in our organizations won't have those abilities, but because of those abilities, those survival techniques that come from being able to go across borders and boundaries, we can make relationships. Again, it comes back to relationships that many people in our organizations won't be as doué, for instance, as good at it as we are, as talented at it as we are. And so that's an advantage. I think whenever we can, we have to step back and do some self-therapy and not let the anger, even when it's justified, bubble to the surface. We have to tamp it down, and remember, we have a superpower. And despite the fact that our visible differences or our known differences can present a challenge and invite, because of different superiority complexes, invite challenges from our colleagues, usually those who are least qualified to challenge us, we have this superpower, and just remind ourselves of that. The other piece I'd say is the anger is justified, but don't bring it, even if it's justified. Um, the workplace is not the place for it. If you have a safe ally and confidant in the workplace who's like your secret person, you can do that when you are alone with them or outside of the office. I suggest we all need this person. We all need our support network, but authenticity doesn't mean letting every feeling you have, every authentic feeling, come out every time you feel it. I think you should have a support network, but not necessarily of the moment all the time in your place of work.
So we're going to open it up for questions. We have mics on two sides of the room. If folks can start lining up, I'll just ask one question as folks come to the mics. But to this point of what we do in our organizations that actually builds the sense of trust, that creates an environment where people do feel like they can bring their whole selves to work. How do you do that? Are there things that your companies have adopted that, again, people in the audience can take back? Are there strategies that we can share around driving a culture of retention and inclusion that combats a lot of the issues that we have in tech, the underrepresentation of minorities in general?
And I just I think back to when we were building the LGBT Chamber of Commerce. I met with a lot of organizations about how they administer their employee resource groups or affinity groups, and just one thing we found, after looking at hundreds of different organizations, who approach it different ways, is really the best way is to establish these cross-functional, cross-departmental ERGs, if you're calling them, employee resource groups is what I'm saying when I say ERGs. But establishing a place where people of like mind can come together, share these sorts of stories, and then kind of replenish themselves to come back into the workplace. I think something that we've seen done poorly, especially at larger organizations, is to try to manage that in buckets at the director level, where you have your own sorts of silo, clashing everyone together, especially in organizations that move in pods, whether they're engineering pods or legal pods or consulting pods, because pods usually work where you have a small group that works in a very intimate way to achieve some short goal, some project, some product, et cetera. And so they have an extreme potential to outcast folks, not because they want to, but because it's the nature of how they get work done. So having a place where people can, again, meet like-minded folks and replenish, I think, is the best place to set in sort of a pervasive culture of not necessarily inclusion. I think that's desirable and down the road, but just acknowledgement first.
Yeah, we've at Google have launched a series of similar types of things. We have a series called Decoding Race that has been rolled out across the U.S., where we assemble a panel similar to this, but literally it's a cross-section of the company that comes together to have really open and explicit dialogues around issues of race and inequality, and it's been really popular. So I think that's a good strategy. Any other
I would just
ideas?
add one thing. So I'm at Shazam, which is a company of 250 employees across 8 offices around the world. So we, don't have the resources to have more immersive programs like you guys described, which I think are terrific. So I think it's incumbent upon those of us in companies like mine to have micro sessions where you're educating other people, especially other decision makers, about the importance of visible diversity and numeric diversity. I think it's also it's important to talk to the recruiters, make sure that they're reaching beyond sort of the usual networks to identify candidates, because otherwise it becomes sort of a self-defeating purpose. So I think sort of those two things. And of course, someone said like network, right? Network outside of your company and bring back ideas from other companies. So those are my thoughts.
What I love, one of the things I love best was that at Twitter we had a session for managers where we talked about what is bad interviewing and bad recruiting, and this idea, and it especially was very, very real in engineering teams, this idea of a fit. oh, well, they fit in with us, or they don't fit in with us, which is code language often. So we outlawed that, fit cannot be an excuse to not bring someone in. I really respect that. I mean, I love the fact in old times at the New York Times, we actually, at one point, I don't think Times does it anymore, but part of your bonus was about the diversity of your recruiters and your retention. And when you make it a part of a bonus structure, funny how it really gets solved.
Measurement, absolutely.
Yeah. Anything else to add, Warren? Yes, please.
Hello, is it on? Can you hear me?
Uh,
I feel like it's on.
That's an amazing shirt, though. Yeah.
You can hear
There
me
we
now.
go.
Thank you. I got an Afro Tech. My name's Andre, and I am really grateful to be here and hear you all talk about this. I don't have specifically a background in tech, but I feel like being a digital native is something that growing up, I'm from Kansas City, Midwest. So you either go the art route or you go the, science and math. And so as an adult, realizing like, I'm a culmination of all of those. My main question, I've been to talks about black folks and people of color at General Assembly, Squarespace, went to Afrotech. And for folks who may not even be aware of if they even have this question, is something that I've really just been grappling with and wanting to know if you all could just help me just think through it, is how do we merge the humanities and technology? To me, they're inherently connected. And what that means is, for instance, I have a background in teaching and dance and performance and also as an administrator. But how do we do the work outside of just being the content creators? Because black folks are creative as fuck, right? So we get shit popping, everyone follows it, everyone likes it. But I'm very much interested in the algorithms. I'm interested in who has access to what and how that works. And also these little ones, right? And like how they're experiencing the internet. I have with just technology, I have a niece that's 6 months, and I just bought her 3 books today. And folks were like amazed, and I'm just like, books, you know what I mean? So just the main question is just thinking about how do we bring, or if it already is happening, and how can we bring artists and activists that are just as, that have the faculties and have the facilities to be able within themselves to use technology in ways outside of just providing content. And I think that'll be a huge form of healing, because I think the main thing I think of with technology is I think of Ogun, like Yoruba, like understanding technology as far as like building railroads, outside of just this digital sphere, and understanding and thinking about that. So I think that automatically ties into it, because our history with building things and building this country and the West in our own home. So it's just something to think about. Thank you.
I think it's a really good question, and I'm not going to actually answer it. I'm going to add to it as a question, because this morning my partner and I were at a very, an independent school here in New York looking at for one of our kids, and the headmaster said something really profound, which was, when we were growing up, it was about humanities was one thing and tech was something else. But now what she said, and this is what children who go to excellent schools are getting, tech is humanities, and it's not just coding, it's what's behind coding, it's AI, it's all these stuff. This is what now is elementary school humanities. This is the foundational stuff now. And that blew my mind, and she's real, and that's happening in all the best schools in the world. I don't think our communities usually are those schools. I mean, some of us are blessed, and some of our kids will be at those schools, but to extend your question, if that's becoming the norm for people who have means, how do we bring along the rest of black folks?
Yeah, I think I think so. Something is interesting. Something interesting is happening, I think, generationally, where younger people are just they're manipulating technologies earlier than we were. I think even though I'm an engineer, I would say my husband works in digital. He's more technical, at least with IT stuff, than I am, because he's in this space right now. Sometimes I don't know where all the wires are going. I'm kind of embarrassed to say it right now. I think I can figure it out, but I think the point is these kids are playing with tech a lot more than we are from the get-go, and everyone's even negotiating now about the acronyms. Should STEM be STEAM? I sit on the board at OSTEM, which is out for science, technology, engineering, and math, and we only have a few black and brown-faced board members, and I'm always shocked at the response that the students give us when we're around, because just by existing, I'm like, yeah, we exist too. But whether it's STEM or STEAM, I think that the arts piece is already there, and we're moving towards a place where even though there will be hardcore engineers, whether they're coders or other things, like I don't necessarily consider coders to be, engineers in the formal sense, like we would used to consider MEs and EEs and chemies. But as things become automated and technology becomes more integrated with our society in general, I think who will actually prevail as being most valuable are the content creators, are the people who distribute whatever their culture is, to I think some of the points you were making about, influencing culture, building this nation, et cetera, et cetera. So for us who are, of a certain age, who, were born before, 2000 or 2005, yeah, maybe we might have to do some extra skills, learning or whatever. But I think younger generations are going to be, good to go with how they distribute themselves, and the more influential ones will be the more, hopefully, the more spicy ones, I guess, for lack of better words. Yeah.
I guess I would add that, this being a technology panel, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about funding and fundraising, right? So until you've got someone or someones who are willing to commit money to the vision that you have, right? And so that will require really framing that vision, showing what the KPIs are, what the roadmap looks like. You really won't get there. So I do think it's coming, and I do think that there are people in our community, community here, allies, who would fund it, but we've got to direct that funding. So at the end of the day, it's about, I think, fundraising. It's easier in big companies, Google, I know, and I'm sure Time Warner fund a lot of experimental things, but the truth is that I think for most tech businesses, it still comes down to what are the VC funds going to do, or who's going to give you the seed money to really move it forward.
But I also think we should look at platforms like YouTube. I mean, it's this incredibly democratic platform that unleashes a tremendous amount of creativity, and people start by taking videos in their bedrooms, and there have been amazing YouTube creators who have built vast careers that are now impacting all sorts of other areas of cultural influence, be it TV or movies or music. So I think absolutely we have to be focused on that funding model, but also take advantage of the fact that technology today is a great platform for experimentation at even the most rudimentary, early stages. And I think, again, platforms like YouTube should be a part of the picture.
One of my 7-year-olds will now tell you he wants to grow up to be a YouTuber.
Yeah.
Literally.
Well, I mean, there was a YouTube success story on the cover of the Wall Street Journal yesterday. Some 20-year-old who is now like.
Oh yeah, YouTube stars actually are displacing Hollywood icons in the minds of Gen Z and millennials. So, yeah.
Hello. DJ Johnson here from American Express. So my question is more, first of all, I want to say thank you guys for all the information that you guys have given us so far. So some of the key things that I've heard are around relationship building, meeting KPIs, and just being a good citizen in general, whether it's in the office or outside of it. So my question is more around leadership, and it's more of a two-part question. So when you have someone who looks like us, who is underperforming in the office, you know it, everybody on the team knows it, and you're sitting in a room with everyone who doesn't look like us, and they're going through reviews, and everyone who doesn't look like us, who are underperforming, are getting these scathing reviews. They get to the person who looks like us, and everybody is pulling back. How do you let them know, or how would you guys approach letting them know that it's okay to treat them as the rest of the candidate or the employees who are underperforming? And how do you approach that person once that review is set, where you're keeping it authentic, but you're also just doing your job?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take that
As
one.
a general counsel, I will
I'll
not answer that question.
I'll take that one. No, I mean, it's a complicated question. I mean, at Google, one of we've done all of this research on the effectiveness of teams, and one of the singularly most important aspect of allowing that kind of dialogue and openness to happen is creating psychological safety on the team. So this notion of psychological safety is it's the foundational element that allows you to get to that place. So I think organizations really need to step back, teams need to step back and think about what are those building blocks that aren't just about the conversation around, rating people or performance reviews, but what else is going on in the context of the way people are working together such that they don't feel like they can be open and authentic in those conversations. And you see the lack of psychological safety amplified when it comes to those kinds of dialogues. So my advice is to get your teams and your organizations to actually step back and think about some of the more fundamentals. There's a site that we built called Rework, and we should figure out how to make sure that we keep the dialogue going and that we also use this as a collective resource around these things. But there are different tools and advice that we've created that can help organizations start to build that. Because until you have that level of connection and trust, it's very hard to have those dialogues.
Yeah, I'll also say, I think, to piggyback on what you just said, I think it does come down to the leader establishing that sort of safety for everyone to be transparent. I had a situation not too long ago with a team that we used to produce a conference this past year. And we invited some new team members to the team who weren't aware of our existing, to use similar terms, safety net. And they were looking for very transactional results. And we had a sort of a project leader, and she was underperforming. She was Black, and she was a she. And I was torn, at home. I was even, disappointed by everything that she was bringing. But this was a concept that she came up with and was supposed to be spearheading. But everyone was looking at me, and everyone else was white and male, everyone. And, I was torn. I was like, I can't kill my girl like that. But every sign pointed to just that. So, as a leader, even though this wasn't my pet project, I was, overseeing a bunch of other things. I had to absorb everything that was coming from her and just basically take it. I filled in a couple gaps for her on some of the things she didn't have with regards to sponsors and production and venue. And after it was all over, then we reevaluated. But I did learn from it as well, because I'm pretty close with some of the board members at our firm, and I was overly transparent with them about my disappointment with her performance. And right after I was overly transparent, they all were too. And it was brash. So, you got to be careful and know what the responsibility that you bear per the role that you have. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to add one other thing. I mean, I heard your question, but the thing that came to my mind was a fear that failure for someone who's a person of color or a woman is viewed more harshly, that you don't have the permission to fail in the same way. And that, to me, would be a bigger concern. Not that the concern you articulated isn't, but that would be my fear, is that when you're in these calibration sessions and you're in the room and it's, person A failed at 10%, and that person's white, and person B failed at 10%, and that person is Latino, and all of a sudden, oh, but this person isn't the right fit, or it was a bad hire. Why does person A have permission to fail at the same rate? So that's what I would be cognizant of as in those rooms.
Yeah, and I think, look, the collective responsibility that we have is to actually prevent people from getting to that situation, and so how do you rally around, ethnic minorities, women? How do you create resources and support networks so that the likelihood that happens decreases? So it's a hard thing, but I think the more we hit at some of these root cause issues, we have to chip away at it. It takes longer, but that's the only way things are going to change.
Yeah, you have to hold everyone up, right? You have to help everyone lift everybody up, right? I mean, obviously women and people of color, but even some white dudes, right, need to be lifted up too, right? Who are not reaching their full potential.
Right,
Although it's true, the problem, just categorically, the problem is larger, and sense you're talking about than the sense the problem you brought to us, just on a macro level. That's just the reality of where we live, right? And the realities of our companies, because there is a support network for a lot of those white guys. It's called the company. It's called the group, right? 'Cause that's what everybody is.
Right. Right.
But I think also if we try to lift everybody up, because you wouldn't be here if we didn't think you were good, right? We wouldn't let you in the door. So if we try to lift everybody up and at the same time hold everybody to standards of excellence, and we're transparent and loud about that, then there's not really room for anybody to say, "Oh, I didn't know we were supposed to be good," you know, whoever you are.
Yeah. Just, I would say, yeah, I think our core failure, just to make it clear, because I'm thinking about it more as you are talking about it, it was failure to indoctrinate the new participants in the team and what the safety net was. And so they were overly aggressive with this person. And so then we had to react because we didn't do that in the beginning. They were kind of outsiders, disrupting what we already had. Even though she was, it was more than 10% underperformance.
Yeah.
It was bad.
Let's take the next question.
All right, thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello. Hi guys, Devontae White, originally from Detroit, Michigan, and a Black college graduate as well. I wanted to know, how do each one of you help support and mentor young Black or young Black gay men that come into your organizations after you that look for help and support in these large, predominantly white companies that we generally belong to?
I haven't seen another one yet, so I'd like to get some in the door. I mean, our team is incredibly diverse. I mean, my team, the mobile team and the off-platform team at CNN News, is 100%, diverse. And I feel very blessed about that, because also 100% excellent. So I think that is a message in of itself to our larger organization. But none of us happen to be African American and gay, So, and that's all right. But I would love to have people in the door. It's much easier to find gay people than African Americans in my business.
And I guess I would hopefully an event like this leads to an opportunity to, support, encourage, network. But for me, I guess I focus maybe a little bit more on supporting people of color just sort of generally, and making sure that I'm available, being generous with my time. Then, beyond time, being generous with my resources for organizations that are about bringing, people into this industry. So that's how I do it.
Why don't we take? Unfortunately, we just have time for one more question. We're all gonna be here and out. There's a reception that we'll have afterwards, so we can continue the dialogue. So why don't we just wrap it up with?
Hello, I'm Harvey. I guess my question is, with this new rise of like cryptocurrency and like blockchains, what do you guys think the future is for like blockchains in the Black community and cryptocurrency, and should we be on the forefront of that?
Sure. Does everyone know what blockchain is? Sure. Some people, I see some heads going now. Well, everyone knows what cryptocurrencies are, though. A Bitcoin.
Level set.
All right.
90-second levels.
Nice. Yeah, I guess we should be at the forefront of all these things. But obviously, if we're not the coders, the technologists, et cetera, building these platforms, we should be at the forefront of who is benefiting from the value that these platforms are providing. So specifically, I mean, most technological platforms, whether it's Amazon or Google or CNN or Shazam, they're facilitating our value or transacting our value. They're learning about us, and they're distributing resources of sorts back to us, whether they're products or services. And I think the best way that we can be included, if your question is about inclusion, is we should have, in my opinion, an ownership stake in the overall productivity of these firms that facilitate the value that they track on us. So every single one of you, there's information being tracked about you 100% of the time. And it's not just your social media data, it's your finance, your insurance, your location data, your healthcare data. Your life, your physical life, is really just a collection of ones and zeros at this point. And as a result, every firm that knows about those ones and zeros in some capacity is productive. And as an economist, I guess after I was an engineer, that's what I scaled into. We established productivity as a measure of inputs. And so we need to be able to make better legal arguments and better ethical arguments around the fact that we are the input to this economy's productivity. And as a result, we need to be paid for it, you know? So I think first things first, we need to be more engaged. We need to be fanatical about what's on the horizon because it's our only opportunity. You know, doing whatever the old guard made its money at, you know, whether it's, I don't care, real estate, autos, you name it, it's not our opportunity. Our opportunity is rooted solely in the tech of tomorrow.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, disruption creates opportunity. And so what you're talking about is disruption that's happening, right, in the financial and tech markets. And I think it's almost back to what you said, like 10 years ago, Amazon, you know, approached you, but you were, you know, in retail, and retail was where it was at. I think in my experience, when I went from a law firm to my first in-house job at a private equity-backed small entertainment company, I took a 50% pay cut. And so the message I would leave, and that was not easy because I did not grow up with money and I had a lot of student loans, but don't be afraid to take one step back, to take two steps forward. Disruption creates opportunity, but you have to take risk. And so what it sounded like you said was, there was that opportunity 10 years ago, and you'd be sitting here as a billionaire now, but you went to Amazon, but I don't know, that's what I heard you say.
And on that note, let's all like take
To run up in the
take the
stock
billionaire route. Please join me in thanking our panelists for this. So we have gift bags for these guys. I also wanted to make you all aware of Rob Smith's book, Confessions of a Don't Ask, Don't Tell Soldier. Rob is actually in the audience. Is he still here? The author is here. This is an amazing book. We only have about 30 copies or so, but they're all signed. We have a reception out the door here to my left, your right. Please join us for drinks, appetizers. We'll stick around, and thank you so much for coming.